Every 30 minutes, somewhere on the internet, a company pays for your attention. You didn't sign anything, you didn't negotiate the terms, but money changed hands and you were the product being sold. About 40% of internet users in wealthy countries have installed software specifically designed to make that transaction fail. These people watch the video, read the article, use the service, and the advertiser gets nothing. Zero. The toll was supposed to be their eyeballs, and they just drove through without paying. The advertising industry has been calling this a crisis for 15 years. Every year they try to solve it. Every year the blockers get smarter, the users get savvier, and the money keeps leaking out of the system like water through cracked concrete. In 2024 and into 2025, Google finally went nuclear. They restructured how Chrome extensions work, a technical framework called Manifest v3, and the entire internet held its breath. Every tech journalist, every privacy advocate, every person who had spent the last decade dodging banner ads was watching to see if the biggest browser on the planet was finally going to kill the ad blocker. It didn't. So here's my question. What does it mean when a trillion-dollar company aims directly at something, uses every tool it has, controls the most dominant platform in the market, and still loses? And more importantly, where does the money go next? We're going to explain how the ad blocking war works and why it's getting weird, not from a tech idealism angle, not from a privacy advocacy angle, from a follow the money angle. Because there's a system here, and once you understand how it actually functions, you start seeing where things are breaking, where they're being rebuilt, and where quiet opportunities are sitting in the wreckage that most people are completely ignoring. Think of the internet as a highway. It was built by a few enormous companies, Google, Meta, a handful of others, who agreed to construct it for free as long as they got to install toll booths every few miles. You don't pay with cash, you pay with your attention. Every time you see an ad, that's the toll. Every time you click, the rate adjusts, the highway operators get richer, you get a functional road, and everyone mostly tolerates the arrangement. This worked for a long time. The tolls were annoying but manageable. The highway was genuinely useful. It was, if not a great deal, at least an acceptable one. Then ad blockers showed up. And ad blockers are essentially a detailed detour map. They show you how to take the back roads and avoid the toll booths entirely. You still get where you're going. You still use the highway infrastructure. But the toll operators collect nothing from you. Now imagine you're the company that built the highway. You're watching 40% of your traffic quietly learn the detour routes. You're watching toll revenue on a significant portion of your infrastructure fall to zero. And you control, and this is the part that actually matters, you control the map application that almost everyone uses to navigate. You could theoretically just remove the back roads from the map, not physically close them. Just make them invisible. That's Manifest v3. That's what Google tried to do. They didn't ban ad blockers in any direct or public way. They changed the technical rules governing how browser extensions can operate. Rules that happen to make it dramatically harder for ad blockers to function properly. Technical, boring on the surface, buried in developer documentation. But the effect was obvious to anyone paying attention. And the detour maps didn't disappear. They adapted, forked, migrated, and in some cases got leaner and faster. Some moved to different highways, some found new back roads. The map kept working. We're going to walk through exactly what happened, why it matters, and what the second and third order financial effects look like for everyone building something on the internet right now. Let's start with scale, because most people genuinely underestimate how much money this fight is actually about. Google's parent company, Alphabet, generates roughly $230 billion in annual revenue. Approximately 75% of that is advertising. So we're talking about $170 billion per year flowing through Google's ad infrastructure alone. Every person running an effective ad blocker represents a small but real leak in that pipeline. The advertising industry publishes research. They're very fond of publishing research, estimating that ad blocking costs the global digital advertising industry somewhere between $70 and $80 billion per year. In lost revenue, that number is almost certainly inflated. Their methodology tends to treat every blocked ad as a converted sale that would definitely have happened otherwise, which requires a level of optimism that borders on delusional. But even if you slash it by 60%, you're still talking about $30 billion per year in what the industry euphemistically calls value destruction. Here's what makes the doom loop fascinating from a systems perspective. The industry's response to rising ad blocker usage was not to make better ads. It was not to offer users a clearer or more equitable deal. The response was to make ads impossible to avoid. Autoplay video with sound, full screen interstitials, ads that follow your scroll position, ads disguised as article content, ads that delay page loading until you've been exposed to them for a minimum number of seconds. Users responded by installing more ad blockers, which drove publishers to make ads even more aggressive to hit revenue targets, which drove more ad blocker adoption. Round and round. The toll operators made the tolls so expensive, so intrusive, so relentlessly annoying that people were willing to learn the long way around. And now that 40% have found the detour, the operators are trying to close the back roads. But the internet, unlike a physical highway, has essentially infinite alternative routes. You cannot bulldoze a software solution. You can only make it harder, and making it harder, as we'll see, has costs of its own. Now let's talk about Manifest v3 specifically, because this is where the analysis gets interesting and most coverage gets lazy. Chrome has approximately 65% of the global browser market. On desktop computers specifically, it's closer to 70%. When a company controls 65 to 70% of how the world accesses the internet, and that company changes how extensions work inside that browser, it affects somewhere between 3 and 4 billion people. This is not a niche technical story. The old system, Manifest v2, allowed extensions like uBlock Origin to intercept network requests dynamically in real time. Before your browser loaded an ad, the extension would catch the request and block it before it ever reached your screen. Fast, clean, effective. uBlock Origin, still the most widely used ad blocker in the world, was built entirely around this capability. Manifest v3 changed the underlying architecture. Instead of allowing extensions to intercept and make decisions on requests dynamically, it imposed a static rule system. Your extension has to pre-declare what it plans to block in a list that Chrome can inspect and control. That list has a hard cap on the number of rules it can contain. The cap in the initial proposal was around 30,000 rules. uBlock Origin requires more than 300,000 rules to function at full capability. You can do that arithmetic in about 2 seconds. Google's official justification was security and performance. The old dynamic request interception model could be exploited by malicious extensions, which is genuinely true. Malware has absolutely used extension capabilities to steal data, redirect traffic, and cause real harm. The security argument has merit on its face, but Google's primary product is advertising. Google's primary justification for Chrome's existence is that it serves Google's advertising business. The browser is not a charity project, it is a distribution mechanism for ad-dependent products. And the remarkable coincidence that the new extension architecture designed for security reasons happens to specifically and severely impair the tools most commonly used to block Google's ads. Well, you're an adult. You can assess the likelihood of that being purely accidental. The Electronic Frontier Foundation publicly opposed Manifest v3. Mozilla, which makes Firefox, committed to maintaining Manifest v2 support because their business model does not depend on advertising in the same way. Thousands of developers submitted formal objections through Google's own development channels. Google made some concessions under this pressure. They raised the rule limit somewhat, allowed limited dynamic filtering in specific categories, but the fundamental architecture shift stayed. The result? uBlock Origin released a light version for Chrome. The light version works, but the full version, the one people actually want and have used for years, works best now on Firefox. That's not incidental, that's the outcome of a deliberate architectural choice. Firefox market share moved, not dramatically. It went from somewhere around 3% to somewhere close to 5% in the period following the Manifest v3 rollout, which sounds small until you realize that represents tens of millions of users making a conscious decision to change their browser over an ad blocker. That's a significant revealed preference. People care about this enough to switch the primary tool they use to access the internet. Brave, the privacy-focused browser with ad blocking built natively into the core product rather than bolted on as an extension, has grown to somewhere around 70 to 80 million monthly active users by early 2026. That's not Chrome numbers. Chrome has billions of users. But for a browser that barely had mainstream recognition 7 years ago, 70 to 80 million is a real viable growing business with genuine momentum. These numbers matter for understanding where the infrastructure of internet access is actually heading. Now here's where most people stop the analysis and conclude, interesting tech story, privacy side won around. Moving on, that's leaving money on the table intellectually. The advertising industry isn't dying. It's restructuring, and the restructuring is happening along a very specific fault line that has financial implications for anyone building anything on the internet right now. The fault line is this: the split between platforms that can force you to see ads and platforms that cannot. YouTube is the clearest case study. YouTube is Google's second most important ad product, generating somewhere in the range of $30 to $40 billion in annual ad revenue. For the last couple of years, YouTube has been running an active, evolving anti-ad block enforcement system. When it detects a user with an active ad blocker, it pauses the video, a pop-up appears, turn off your ad blocker or purchase YouTube Premium. The wording changes, the detection methods update, the ad blocker developers find workarounds, YouTube patches those workarounds, an arms race happening continuously in real time. What YouTube learned from this fight is something they probably already suspected but now have direct experimental data to confirm. A meaningful percentage of users, when forced into a binary choice, will pay. YouTube Premium costs around $14 per month. The forced choice experiment, disable your blocker or pay, drove premium subscription numbers meaningfully upward. Not explosive growth, but consistent, sustained growth. in a direction that suggests the subscription model has more headroom than the platform previously had reason to push for. This is an enormous insight, and it's being filed away across the entire industry right now. Here's the framework I want you to internalize because it changes how you think about building anything on the internet. Think of two piles. In pile one, platforms and products so genuinely essential to users that when forced to choose between ads and payment, a meaningful percentage will pay. YouTube is in this pile, Spotify is in this pile, a handful of others. These are products where the switching cost is high because the product is uniquely good or uniquely convenient. The network effect is real. The habit is deep. In pile two, platforms that people use because they're free and convenient, but would immediately replace with something equally good or better if that alternative were equally free. This pile is enormous. Most of the internet lives here. Every content site that isn't truly differentiated, every newsletter that's basically the same as 50 other newsletters, every app that solves a problem that 5 other apps also solve. The ad blocker is essentially a stress test that reveals which pile a product is in. If your users are blocking ads and you implement an anti-ad block wall and they leave, you're in pile 2. Your product is not essential enough to compel payment, the value isn't there, or you haven't articulated it clearly enough, or you're competing with too many equivalent free alternatives. If your users are blocking ads and you implement the wall and a meaningful percentage of them pay, you're in pile 1. You have something worth paying for. The ad blocker just forced you to discover it. Most publishers are running from this discovery. The smart ones are running toward it. Before I go further, if this kind of analysis is what you actually came for, subscribe. I'm going to keep building on this exact kind of systems thinking, and the stuff that doesn't make it into the public videos goes to people who are paying attention. Let me give you a concrete scenario, because the abstract version is less useful than walking through real math. Imagine a finance content site, not huge, but real. 2 million monthly visitors, decent content, established readership that trust the site's analysis. They're running display advertising, some pre-roll video, some sponsored posts. Their revenue per 1,000 visitors, their RPM, averages around $10 across ad types. 2 million monthly visitors at $10 RPM gives them roughly 20 grand per month in ad revenue. That's 240 grand per year, a real small business. Their analytics team runs a new report and finds something uncomfortable. 43% of their audience is behind an ad blocker. Their real monetized audience is about 1.1 million people, not 2 million. Their effective RPM on total traffic is actually closer to $5.70 because almost half the audience is seeing nothing. They have 4 options and only one of them is actually good. Option 1, implement an anti-ad block gate. Block the site content until the user disables their blocker or whitelists the site. Research across multiple publishers suggests this approach recovers somewhere between 8 and 15% of blocked users. The other 85 to 92% close the tab immediately and never return. You've gained a little revenue and lost a portion of your audience permanently. Your Google search rankings also take a small but real hit because your bounce rate went up. Net result, marginal revenue improvement at the cost of audience attrition. Option 2, add more ads. Make the experience more aggressive to extract more revenue per monetized user. This accelerates ad blocker adoption in your audience. You are feeding the exact feedback loop that created your problem. This option is chosen constantly. Option 3, negotiate directly with advertisers for sponsorships rather than programmatic ads. Cut out the ad network middlemen who take between 40 and 60% of every transaction. A direct sponsorship deal on a finance site with a trusted, engaged audience of 2 million might command something like $15,000 to $25,000 per month from a single relevant advertiser. A brokerage, a fintech product, a professional software company, that's already at or above the current total ad revenue for one deal. With one partner, no impressions wasted on the 43% who are blocking anyway. Not a perfect solution, sales effort is real, but a meaningful improvement. Option 4, and this is the one that actually changes the math fundamentally. Launch a paid membership, call it what you want, premium access, supporter tier, subscriber community. No ads for members, $12 per month. The existing research on content sites that have done this suggests you can expect somewhere between 1 and 3% of your total audience to convert in the first year, with consistent content quality and clear value articulation. Let's use 2% of the 1.1 million monetized audience, because we're being conservative. That's 22,000 paying members. 22,000 times $12 is 260 cents. $4,000 per month, 2,500,000 per year. That's not a typo. The ad revenue is $240,000 per year. The membership revenue at a 2% conversion rate is $2,500,000 per year. That's more than 10 times the ad revenue. It doesn't fluctuate with CPM market rates. It doesn't evaporate when Google updates its algorithm. It doesn't disappear when a major advertiser pauses spending during a news cycle, and it is entirely immune to ad blockers because it doesn't involve ads. Now, here is the part of this math that most people completely miss. The 43% who are blocking ads, the people most publishers write off as lost revenue, are statistically more likely to convert to paid membership than the non-blocking audience. Multiple studies on this show the same pattern. Ad blocker users are younger on average, but not poor. They are more technically sophisticated. They are more likely to be in professional or high-income demographics. They are more likely to have paid for software subscriptions or digital products before. They have already demonstrated by installing a browser extension that they take intentional action to improve their digital experience. These are not passive users. These are exactly the kind of user who, when you offer them a better deal, evaluates it seriously rather than just closing the tab. The publisher who treats their ad blocking audience as lost revenue is misreading the data completely. That 43% is a warm lead list of premium users waiting to be asked the right question. Meanwhile, at a major ad network's quarterly strategy meeting, someone suggests making the video ads unskippable and also louder. Everyone nods. A junior analyst raises their hand and asks if perhaps they should consider whether users might just not want ads. Long silence. The analyst is given a very affirming performance review and then assigned to a different department. The ads get louder. Now let's talk about the deeper structural movement that the ad blocker story is pointing toward, because this is where the real financial signal lives. The advertising industry is not going to die. That would be too simple. What's happening is a consolidation and a migration that has very specific winners and losers. And if you understand which way it's moving, you can position accordingly. 3 places the money is going. 3 real destinations for advertising revenue as it migrates away from the open web model that ad blockers are eroding. First, walled gardens. Platforms that control the entire stack. The device, the operating system, the app store, the payment system, the user identity can enforce ad viewing in ways that open browsers never could. You can block ads on a website loaded in Chrome. You cannot meaningfully block ads inside a native app on most mobile devices without root access or significant technical effort. The shift in time spent from browsers to native apps has been happening steadily for over a decade, and part of what's accelerating it is that the browser experience has become adversarial, while app experiences have remained more controlled, cleaner, and faster. Apple and Google don't let you install an ad blocker at the operating system level. That's not an accident. The toll booth is built into the road here, not placed on top of it afterward. Second, first-party data businesses, the death of third-party tracking cookies is real and is still in progress. GDPR in Europe changed the legal landscape. State-level privacy laws in the United States are proliferating. Similar legislation is spreading through every major economy. The infrastructure of behavioral targeting, the tracking pixels, the third-party cookies, the cross-site identity stitching that allowed advertisers to follow you across the entire internet and show you the exact right ad at the exact right moment. That infrastructure is being legally and technically dismantled simultaneously. What survives is first-party data. Data you gave directly to a company because you signed up for their product. Email addresses, purchase histories, loyalty program data, actual declared preferences from actual users. Companies that have deep, clean, consented first-party data are worth dramatically more in this environment than companies that depend on purchased or scraped behavioral data. This is why every major retailer in the world is building a retail media network right now. This is why Amazon advertising has become the 3rd largest digital ad platform. Amazon knows exactly what you bought, what you searched for, what you added to your cart and abandoned. That is first-party data at a scale that no publisher or ad network can match. Third, contextual advertising. This one sounds like going backward in time, but follow the logic. Before the era of surveillance capitalism, before behavioral targeting existed, advertising worked on context. You read a car magazine, you saw car ads. You watched a cooking show, you saw kitchen appliance ads. No tracking, no cookies, no identity graphs. Just the editorial context of the content as a signal for what ads might be relevant. The funny thing, and this is actually funny to me, is that contextual advertising converts nearly as well as behavioral targeting in many product categories, particularly for high consideration purchases, where the user is already in a relevant mindset by virtue of reading related content. And it requires none of the infrastructure that ad blockers, privacy regulations, and browser policy changes are dismantling. Several ad tech companies have been quietly rebuilding contextual targeting capabilities for the past 3 to 4 years, staffing up engineering teams, rebuilding the natural language processing pipelines that can classify page content in real time. They're not getting press coverage because we rebuilt the thing from 20 years ago, but smarter doesn't generate headlines. But the economics are going to be favorable. Here's the second order effect that almost nobody in the mainstream conversation is actually computing. When 40% of users block ads and a platform needs to hit the same revenue targets, it has to charge more per impression from the audience that isn't blocking. Higher cost per impression means less efficient ad spend for advertisers. Less efficient ad spend means smaller advertisers who are already operating on thin margins get priced out of the market. They can't afford the rates. They leave. Who can afford higher rates? Large advertisers with massive budgets and teams dedicated to optimizing ad spend. So the market consolidates. Fewer advertisers compete on the major platforms. The major platforms, Google, Meta, Amazon, actually benefit from this consolidation because less competition for inventory means, more competition for inventory means higher prices, which is what they want. But the consolidation means the long tail of small and medium advertisers gets pushed out. Those small and medium advertisers are what fund independent publishers. They're the companies that advertise on niche sites, subject matter blogs, enthusiast communities, regional news sites. As they exit digital advertising, the revenue that was funding that entire layer of the internet dries up. Independent publishing becomes less viable. More sites shut down or get acquired. The internet becomes more concentrated around a smaller number of larger properties that can still attract major advertiser budgets. You think the problem is ad blockers, but actually the problem is that a large portion of the internet never had a real business model. It was always subsidized by advertising rates that were too high relative to actual conversion value, propped up by the illusion of precision targeting that surveillance capitalism promised but rarely delivered at scale. Ad blockers are making this visible. They're accelerating the recognition of what was always true. Most of the content on the internet was funded by a model that was one algorithmic update, one regulatory shift, or one user behavior change away from falling apart. The question for anyone building something now is, which side of this restructuring do you want to be on? I'll tell you exactly how I think about this when I'm looking at any content or media business. I want to know the answer to one question before anything else. If this business had to survive entirely on direct revenue from users, could it? Not hypothetically, not theoretically, but with its current audience and current product. If the answer is no, if the entire value proposition requires the advertising subsidy to survive, that's a business I'm interested in only as a short-term extraction play, not as something to build long-term. Because the subsidy is shrinking, the timeline might be uncertain, but the direction is not. If the answer is yes, if the audience is specific enough and the value is clear enough and the trust is deep enough that users would actually pay, that's a fundamentally different kind of asset. And in the current environment, those assets are undervalued because most investors still default to the old mental model where a larger audience is always more valuable regardless of monetization structure. A newsletter with 50,000 paying subscribers at $15 per month is worth dramatically more than a website with 2 million monthly visitors entirely dependent on programmatic ads. The newsletter generates $900,000 per year in predictable, recurring, uncorrelated revenue. The website generates somewhere between $80,000 and $200,000 per year in revenue. That fluctuates with CPM markets, platform algorithms, and ad blocker penetration. The newsletter is also immune to every threat we've discussed today. Ad blockers don't block email. Privacy regulations don't affect consented email lists. Manifest v3 has no effect on Substack. The moat is real. Most people still value internet businesses by traffic. The people who understand the actual incentive structure are starting to value them by direct revenue per user and by the depth of relationship rather than the width of audience. A publisher losing money, our traffic is up 12% this quarter. An analyst looking at their ad revenue declining despite the traffic increase, that's nice. The publisher, we reached 4 million monthly visitors. The analyst, what percentage use an ad blocker? The publisher, we don't track that. The analyst closes their laptop and leaves without saying goodbye. Let's come back to where we started. A $1 trillion company with dominant control over the most widely used internet access tool in the world executed a calculated technical maneuver designed to impair the primary tool that 40% of sophisticated internet users rely on to control their own experience. The company had every structural advantage. They controlled the platform, they wrote the rules, they set the timeline. The ad blocker survived, not without costs, not without compromises. The ecosystem shifted, some tools got lighter, some users moved to Firefox or Brave. The full capability of the best ad blockers now lives primarily outside Chrome, but the functionality persists, the behavior persists, the 40% is still there, still refusing the toll. This tells you something important about the strength of an incentive. When an incentive is strong enough, when the value of avoiding unwanted interruption is real enough, it survives institutional opposition. It finds new routes. It adapts. The behavior is not going away because Google made it slightly harder. It went somewhere Google controls slightly less. That's a pattern worth remembering whenever you're trying to predict where something is heading. Here are 3 things you can actually do with this information. First, If you're building any content operation or online business, design your monetization from the start for a world where your target user is running an ad blocker. Not as an afterthought, not as a pivot when ad revenue disappoints, from the beginning. Direct membership, product sales, consulting, software, paid community, whatever form makes sense for your specific value proposition. The ad dependent model is a declining asset. The direct revenue model has less competition right now, precisely because everyone else is still crowding onto the declining one. The time to build the well is before you're thirsty. Second, if you're spending money on paid advertising, understand what consolidation means for your input costs. Advertising rates on Google, Meta, and Amazon are structurally rising as the addressable inventory shrinks and more advertisers consolidate spend on fewer platforms. If paid customer acquisition is a core part of your business model, the cost of that acquisition is going to keep rising. Build in the alternative now. Referral programs, SEO, community-driven growth. Content earns attention rather than buys it. The businesses that survive the next 5 years in competitive consumer markets will be the ones that figured out how to grow without entirely depending on paid channels. Third, watch Brave and a privacy-preserving ad model. Brave's approach: block third-party ads, replace with privacy-respecting first-party ads, compensate the user for attention, is not necessarily going to win in its current form. But the principle it embodies, that user attention has value and users should participate in the value exchange rather than have value extracted from them invisibly, is an idea whose time is increasingly coming. When you see products and companies built on that principle, pay attention. The market is slowly rewarding the model that aligns user incentives with business incentives rather than exploiting the gap between them. The old toll booth model is cracking, not collapsing overnight, cracking. The traffic is finding new routes, the map is being redrawn. And the people who understand what's actually happening, not the surface level privacy good, ads bad framing, but the actual incentive restructuring underneath, are going to build in the right places. If you want to keep thinking about how systems actually work and where money actually moves, subscribe. I don't make content to fill a schedule.